Every morning at 6 a.m., Rosa's alarm would ring in her tiny one-bedroom apartment. She would get up quietly, trying not to wake her 17-year-old daughter, Elena, who was still sleeping after another late night of studying and practicing violin. Rosa had been doing this routine for 3 years now, and every day felt exactly the same. Rosa worked as a housekeeper for the wealthy Thompson family who lived in a huge penthouse apartment in the rich part of the city. The building was so fancy that even the doorman wore a suit that probably cost more than Rosa made in a month. When she first got the job, she thought she was lucky. The pay was decent, and the family seemed normal enough during the interview. But working there was harder than she expected. Not because the work was difficult. Rosa had been cleaning houses since she was 16 and knew how to make everything spotless. The hard part was how the Thompson family treated her like she was invisible. Mr. David Thompson owned 3 tech companies and was always on his phone making deals worth millions of dollars. His wife Linda spent her days shopping, getting her nails done, and planning fancy parties for their rich friends. They had everything money could buy, but they never seemed happy. They would walk past Rosa while she was cleaning and act like she wasn't even there. Rosa had grown up in a small town where her grandmother taught her to play piano on an old instrument at the local church. Music had always been her escape from the tough times. Even when her family struggled to pay for food, she could sit at that piano and forget about everything else. Her fingers would dance across the keys, and for those moments she felt rich in a way that had nothing to do with money. When Rosa moved to the city to find better work, she had to leave that old piano behind. She missed it every single day. Sometimes at night, she would close her eyes and imagine playing her favorite songs, her fingers moving silently in the air as if the keys were still there. The Thompson house had a beautiful black piano in their living room. It was huge and shiny, probably worth more than most people's cars. Rosa had asked Linda about it once while dusting nearby. "Oh, that old thing," Linda had said with a wave of her hand. "David bought it because he thought it made the room look more elegant. None of us actually play it, it's just for decoration." Rosa's heart had broken a little that day. Here was this amazing instrument, capable of making the most beautiful music in the world, and it was just sitting there like an expensive piece of furniture. Every day when she cleaned around it, she would look at those keys and remember how it felt to make music. The worst part of Rosa's day was usually lunchtime. The Thompsons would often have friends over, and Rosa would serve them their meals while they talked about their expensive vacations, their new cars, and their children's private schools. They would laugh and joke, never including Rosa in anything, even though she was standing right there. Rosa's daughter Elena was incredibly smart and talented. She played violin beautifully and dreamed of going to music school after she finished high school. But music schools were expensive, and even with Rosa working 2 jobs, it was hard to save enough money. Rosa worked at the Thompson house during the day, and 3 nights a week she cleaned office buildings until late at night. Elena never complained about their small apartment or their tight budget. She would practice her violin quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain, and she helped around the house whenever she could. Rosa was so proud of her daughter and would do anything to help her dreams come true. Some days, when Rosa was especially tired from working so many hours, she would think about giving up. But then she would see Elena practicing violin with such dedication and passion, and Rosa would remember why she worked so hard. Every sacrifice was worth it if it meant Elena could have a better life. The Thompson family had no idea about Rosa's musical background. To them, she was just the cleaning lady who showed up every day to make their house perfect. They didn't know that Rosa had once played piano for her entire town at church services. They didn't know that she had taught herself to read music and could play complex classical pieces from memory. They didn't know that music was the most important thing in Rosa's life, even more important than money or status. Rosa kept her musical knowledge to herself because she had learned that rich people often didn't take her seriously. When she first started working for wealthy families years ago, she had mentioned her musical interests a few times. But people would give her strange looks, as if they couldn't believe that someone who cleaned houses could understand classical music. So Rosa stayed quiet about her passion and just did her job. She would dust that beautiful piano every day, sometimes running her fingers gently across the keys when no one was watching. The sound would be so soft that nobody could hear it, but Rosa could feel the vibration of the strings inside the piano, and for just a moment she would remember what it felt like to make music. The Thompson family had no idea what they had sitting in their living room, and they had no idea who was cleaning it every day. But Rosa knew that someday, somehow, music would be part of her life again. She just had to be patient and keep working hard for Elena's future. One evening, as Rosa was finishing her cleaning for the day, she overheard Linda Thompson talking on the phone about planning another one of her fancy dinner parties. "Make sure everything is perfect," Linda was saying. "I want to impress these people. They're all so successful and sophisticated." Rosa quietly gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave, not knowing that this dinner party would change everything. She had no idea that in just a few days she would find herself sitting at that beautiful piano, playing music for people who had never seen her as anything more than just the help. As Rosa walked home that evening, she thought about Elena practicing violin in their small apartment. She thought about the bills that needed to be paid and the dreams that seemed so far away. She thought about that silent piano in the Thompson house, waiting for someone to bring it to life. Rosa didn't know it yet, but sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who understand music the deepest are the ones who have been forced to live without it for too long. The dinner party was scheduled for Saturday night, and Linda Thompson had been preparing for weeks. She wanted everything to be absolutely perfect because some very important people were coming. There would be judges, lawyers, business owners, and even a famous art dealer who had been featured in magazines. Rosa arrived early that day to help with the preparations. The apartment had to be spotless, the flowers had to be arranged perfectly, and every piece of expensive china had to shine. Linda followed Rosa around the house, pointing out tiny details that needed attention. "Make sure you clean the piano extra well," Linda said, examining her reflection in the shiny black surface. "Tonight's guests will notice everything. These are very sophisticated people who appreciate fine things." Rosa nodded and carefully polished every inch of the piano. As she worked, she wondered what it would be like to actually hear music played on such a beautiful instrument. She imagined how rich and full the sound would be, how each note would ring out clearly in the large room with its high ceilings. By 6 o'clock, Rosa had finished all her regular cleaning duties, but Linda asked her to stay and help serve dinner. This meant Rosa would earn some extra money, which she desperately needed for Elena's violin lessons. Rosa called Elena to let her know she would be home late. "Don't worry about me, Mom," Elena said sweetly. "I'll practice quietly and do my homework. You work hard to take care of us." The guests began arriving at 7. Rosa watched from the kitchen as they entered the apartment, all dressed in expensive clothes and jewelry. The women wore dresses that probably cost more than Rosa's rent, and the men had watches that sparkled with diamonds. Rosa served appetizers while the guests mingled and talked about their successful businesses, their vacation homes, and their children's achievements at prestigious schools. They spoke loudly and laughed often, clearly enjoying showing off their wealth to each other. David Thompson was particularly animated that evening. He had just closed a major business deal and was feeling very pleased with himself. As the wine flowed freely, he became more talkative and started telling stories to entertain his guests. "You know what's funny about having staff?" David said loudly, gesturing with his wine glass. "They always think they're so much more than they actually are. Our housekeeper, for instance, probably thinks she's cultured because she dusts our piano every day." The guests laughed politely, not really paying attention to what David was saying. But Rosa, who was quietly refilling water glasses nearby, felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She tried to stay focused on her work and ignore the comment. After dinner, the guests moved to the living room for coffee and desserts. Rosa was clearing the dining table when she heard David's voice getting louder in the next room. He had definitely had too much wine, and his voice was carrying throughout the apartment. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced dramatically, "I want to show you something amusing. Rosa, come in here." Rosa's heart sank. She knew that tone of voice. David used it whenever he wanted to make himself look important in front of other people. She put down the dishes she was carrying and walked slowly into the living room, where all the guests were now looking at her with curious expressions. "Rosa here has been working for us for 3 years," David continued, enjoying the attention from his audience. "And she seems to think that because she cleans our piano, she actually knows something about music. Isn't that adorable?" Some of the guests smiled uncomfortably. Others looked confused about where this was going. Linda Thompson was giggling behind her hand, encouraging her husband's performance. "I bet she thinks she could actually play that piano," David went on, pointing at the beautiful instrument in the corner. "Someone like her trying to play classical music, can you imagine?" Rosa stood frozen in the middle of the room. She could feel 20 pairs of eyes staring at her, and her face was burning with shame. She needed this job so badly. Elena's school. Fees were due next month, and Rosa had already picked up extra cleaning work just to make ends meet. "Go ahead, Rosa," David said with a mean smile. "Show our guests what you think music is supposed to sound like. I'm sure it will be educational for everyone." Several guests had pulled out their phones, ready to record what they clearly expected to be an embarrassing moment. Rosa could see the anticipation in their faces. They were preparing to laugh. At her expense. "Oh, this should be good," whispered one of the women to her friend. "I love watching people embarrass themselves." Rosa looked around the room desperately, hoping someone would speak up and stop this cruel game. But everyone was watching her with expressions of amusement and expectation. They were all wealthy, successful people who had probably never been humiliated in their entire lives. They couldn't understand what this felt like. Linda Thompson was practically bouncing with excitement. "Go on, Rosa," she encouraged. "Don't be shy. We're all friends here." But they weren't friends. Rosa was just entertainment for them, like a circus animal being forced to perform tricks. She thought about Elena at home, probably practicing violin, and dreaming of going to music school. She thought about all the bills that needed to be paid, and all the sacrifices she had made to give her daughter a better life. Rosa's hands were shaking as she walked toward the piano. Every step felt like a mile. The guests were whispering to each other and positioning themselves to get the best view of what they expected to be a disaster. "This is going to be hilarious," someone muttered. "Poor thing probably doesn't even know where Middle C is," another person added with a smirk. David Thompson stood with his arms crossed, looking very pleased with himself. He had successfully turned his housekeeper into the evening's entertainment, and his guests were thoroughly amused by the spectacle. Rosa reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, looking at the keys that she had polished so carefully that morning. Her heart was pounding, and she could feel tears starting to form in her eyes. She wanted to run away, to hide from all these cruel, laughing faces. But then she thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that music wasn't about money or status or impressing people. Music was about truth and beauty, and expressing what was in your heart. Her grandmother had told her that the piano didn't care if you were rich or poor. It only cared if you played with soul. Rosa slowly sat down on the bench, her cleaning uniform, looking out of place against the elegant black piano. The room fell completely silent as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Some guests were already smiling, preparing to laugh at whatever amateur noise Rosa was about to make. Rosa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about Elena, about all the nights they had spent listening to classical music together, on their old radio. She thought about every sacrifice she had made and every dream she had been forced to put aside. Then she placed her fingers on the keys, and everything changed. Rosa's fingers found their place on the keys, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The room was completely silent except for the soft sound of her breathing. All the guests were watching, phones ready, expecting to witness an embarrassing moment. They could laugh about later, but Rosa wasn't thinking about them anymore. As her fingers touched the piano keys for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she was coming home. The instrument was perfectly tuned and incredibly responsive. Each key felt smooth and familiar under her fingertips, like greeting an old friend after a long separation. She began with the opening notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1, a piece she had learned by heart years ago when she was still living in her hometown. The first few notes were soft and gentle, almost like a whisper. But even those quiet sounds were so pure and perfect that something magical began to happen in the room. The smirks on the guests' faces started to fade. The phones that had been raised to record Rosa's humiliation slowly lowered as people realized that something unexpected was happening. These were not the clumsy amateur sounds they had been expecting to hear. As Rosa continued playing, the music began to build and grow. Her fingers moved across the keys with incredible skill and confidence. Every note was exactly where it should be, every phrase shaped with deep musical understanding. The technique was flawless, but more importantly, the music was filled with emotion that touched everyone in the room. David Thompson's cruel smile disappeared completely. His wine glass hung forgotten in his hand as he stared in shock at his housekeeper, who was playing one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire with the skill of a professional concert pianist. The music filled the large living room with its rich, complex harmonies. Rosa's years of secret practice in empty office buildings had kept her skills sharp, but now she was playing on an instrument that was worthy of her talent. Every subtle dynamic, every delicate phrase, every powerful climax rang out with crystal clarity. As the piece continued, Rosa felt all her pain and struggles flowing through the music. Every late night of work, every sacrifice for Elena, every moment of being treated as invisible, it all became part of the music. But there was also hope in her playing, and love, and the deep joy that comes from finally being able to express what has been locked inside for too long. One of the guests, a woman named Catherine, who wrote about classical music for the city newspaper, felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had attended hundreds of concerts and heard world-famous pianists perform, but there was something special about what she was hearing now. The technical skill was impressive enough, but the emotional depth was extraordinary. The music seemed to tell Rosa's entire life story without using any words. There were moments of sadness that reflected all the hardships she had endured, but there were also passages of incredible beauty that spoke of her love for Elena and her unwavering hope for the future. Other guests began to put away their phones, entirely realizing that what they were witnessing was not something to be mocked, but something to be treasured. The room had become completely still, except for the sound of Rosa's playing. Even the traffic noise from the street below seemed to have faded away. Linda Thompson stood with her mouth slightly open, unable to process what she was seeing and hearing. The woman she had treated as nothing more than a cleaning lady was performing classical music with a level of artistry that Linda herself could never understand, let alone achieve. As the piece moved into its most challenging sections, Rosa's playing became even more powerful and expressive. Her fingers flew across the keys with amazing speed and accuracy, but every note still sang with meaning. The difficult passages that would challenge even professional pianists seemed effortless under Rosa's skilled hands. Some of the guests began to recognize just how difficult the piece Rosa was playing really was. These were educated, sophisticated people who attended the opera and symphony regularly. They knew enough about classical music to understand that what they were hearing required years of serious study and natural talent. The businessman who had earlier whispered that Rosa probably didn't know where Middlesea was now stood in complete silence, humbled by his ignorance. The woman who had expected to be entertained by Rosa's embarrassment found herself deeply moved by the beauty of the music. As Rosa approached the climactic section of the piece, her playing reached new heights of intensity and passion. The piano seemed to sing under her hands, producing sounds of incredible richness and power. Every person in the room could feel the music touching their hearts in ways they hadn't expected. Catherine, the music critic, was now openly crying. In all her years of writing about classical music, she had rarely encountered such a perfect combination of technical mastery and emotional honesty. She could tell that Rosa wasn't just playing notes on a page, she was sharing her soul with everyone in the room. The music built to its magnificent conclusion, with cascading runs and powerful chords that filled the apartment with glorious sound. Rosa's face was peaceful and focused, completely absorbed in the music she was creating. For these precious minutes, she wasn't a housekeeper or a struggling single mother. She was simply a musician, doing what she was born to do. When the final notes rang out and slowly faded into silence, The room remained completely still for what felt like an eternity. No one moved or spoke. The silence was so complete that Rosa could hear her own heartbeat. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. It was Catherine, the music critic, and her applause was not the polite clapping that usually followed dinner party entertainment. These were the slow, deliberate claps of someone who had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Others joined in, and soon the entire room was filled with genuine, heartfelt applause. But this wasn't the kind of clapping that Rosa had expected when this nightmare began. These people weren't laughing at her or mocking her performance. They were applauding with the same respect and admiration they would show to any world-class musician. David Thompson stood frozen, his face pale with shock and embarrassment. He had expected to humiliate Rosa and entertain his guests with her failure. Instead, he had inadvertently revealed that he had been employing someone with extraordinary talent, while treating her like she was worthless. Rosa slowly lifted her hands from the keys and turned to face the room. The faces looking back at her were completely different now. Where there had been smug amusement and cruel anticipation, there was now genuine respect and wonder. For the first time in 3 years of working in this apartment, Rosa was finally being seen for who she really was. The applause continued for what felt like forever, but Rosa barely heard it. She was still sitting at the piano bench trying to process what had just happened. For 3 years, she had cleaned this instrument every day, dreaming of the moment when she might play it again. Now that moment was over and everything had changed. Catherine, the music critic, was the first person to approach Rosa. She walked across the room with tears still visible in her eyes, completely ignoring the other guests who were still clapping. "That was absolutely incredible," Catherine said softly, kneeling down beside the piano bench so she could look Rosa in the eyes. "I've been writing about classical music for 15 years, and I've rarely heard Chopin played with such depth and understanding. Where did you study?" Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper when she answered. "I didn't really study anywhere formal. My grandmother taught me the basics when I was young, and I've been learning on my own ever since." Catherine's eyes widened in amazement. "You're self-taught? That's impossible. The technique you just displayed takes decades of professional training to achieve." Other guests began to gather around the piano, their earlier cruel intentions completely forgotten. The judge who had been ready to record Rosa's embarrassment now looked ashamed of himself. The art dealer who had whispered jokes was now studying Rosa with the same respect he would show to any accomplished artist. "How long have you been playing?" asked Dr. Peterson, a retired music professor who had been attending Thompson dinner parties for years. His voice was filled with genuine curiosity and respect. "Since I was 7, Rosa replied, still feeling overwhelmed by all the attention. "But I haven't had access to a good piano in many years. I practice sometimes on old keyboards at the community center, but it's not the same." "Practice?" Catherine couldn't hide her amazement. "You mean you've been maintaining this level of skill without regular access to a proper piano? That's extraordinary." David Thompson stood at the back of the group, looking more uncomfortable by the minute. His wife Linda was beside him, her face showing confusion and embarrassment. They had both been so certain that Rosa was just a simple cleaning woman with no special talents or abilities. "Rosa," Dr. Peterson continued, "that piece you just played, Chopin's First Ballade, it's considered one of the most challenging works in the piano repertoire. Professional pianists spend months preparing to perform it in public. How did you learn it?" Rosa thought back to those long nights in her hometown, sitting at the old church piano with a borrowed book of sheet music, working through each difficult passage by candlelight because they couldn't afford to keep the electricity on late at night. "I found the sheet music at a used bookstore when I was 16, she explained. "It took me almost a year to learn it properly. I would go to the church after everyone else had gone home and practice until my fingers were too tired to continue." The guests exchanged amazed glances. They were all successful, educated people who were used to having every advantage in life. The idea that someone could achieve this level of musical mastery through pure determination and passion, without expensive lessons or perfect instruments, was almost impossible for them to understand. Catherine pulled out her business card and handed it to Rosa. I write for the arts section of the city newspaper. I would love to do a story about you and your musical background. People need to hear about this." "Oh, I don't think that's necessary," Rosa said quickly, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm just a housekeeper. I'm not important enough for newspaper stories." "Are you kidding?" Catherine replied firmly. "What you just did was more important than half the concert reviews I write. You have a gift that needs to be shared with the world." Mr. Harrison, a wealthy businessman who owned several music venues in the city, stepped forward. "Rosa, I organize classical music concerts throughout the year. I would be honored to offer you a chance to perform at one of our upcoming events." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She had dreamed of playing for real audiences again, but those dreams had seemed so impossible that she had almost stopped believing in them. "I couldn't possibly," she said, shaking her head. "I don't have the right clothes or the training or—" "Nonsense," interrupted Mrs. Chen, who sat on the board of the city's music conservatory. "Talent like yours doesn't depend on clothes or formal training. It comes from the heart, and yours is clearly filled with music." Dr. Peterson was studying Rosa thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered going back to school for music? There are programs for adult students, and with your natural ability, you could probably earn a degree in just a few years." Rosa laughed sadly. "I can barely afford rent and my daughter's school expenses. Music school is completely out of reach for someone like me." "What if it wasn't?" Mrs. Chen asked quietly. "What if there were scholarships available for exceptional students regardless of their age or background?" Before Rosa could respond, Catherine was already making plans. "I want to write about your story, but I also want to help you find opportunities to continue developing your musical career. This is too important to ignore." David Thompson finally found his voice, though he sounded very different from the confident man who had started this whole situation. "Rosa, I had no idea. I mean, we never knew that you—" He stopped talking when he realized how foolish he sounded. How could he possibly explain that he had employed someone for 3 years without ever bothering to learn anything about her as a person? Linda Thompson was even more embarrassed. She remembered all the times she had dismissed Rosa as just the cleaning lady when talking to her friends. She thought about how many times she had treated Rosa as if she were invisible or unimportant. "The video of your performance is probably already spreading online," one of the younger guests mentioned, showing Rosa his phone. Several people were recording, and this is the kind of thing that goes viral immediately. Rosa felt a moment of panic. "Video? But I didn't agree to be recorded. What if people see it?" Catherine placed a gentle hand on Rosa's shoulder. "If people see it, they'll see something beautiful and inspiring. They'll see proof that extraordinary talent exists in places where we least expect to find it." Over the next hour, the entire atmosphere of the evening changed completely. The guests who had come to enjoy an elegant dinner party ended up having deep conversations about music, talent, and the assumptions society makes about people based on their jobs or economic status. Several people exchanged contact information with Rosa, offering help with everything from piano lessons to performance opportunities. Dr. Peterson promised to look into scholarship programs at local music schools. Mr. Harrison insisted on scheduling a meeting to discuss possible concert appearances. Catherine was already planning her article, which she was certain would be front-page news in the art section. "This story has everything," she explained to Rosa. "Hidden talent, social commentary, and most importantly, hope. People need to read about someone like you." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, each one made a point of speaking personally with Rosa. They thanked her for sharing her gift and apologized, either directly or indirectly, for their initial attitudes. Rosa stood in the elegant living room, still wearing her simple cleaning uniform, holding a collection of business cards from some of the most influential people in the city's cultural community. Everything had changed in the space of one evening, all because she had been forced to play a piano she had been cleaning for 3 years. But the most important change wasn't in how other people saw Rosa. It was in how Rosa was beginning to see herself again. For the first time in years, she remembered that she was more than just someone who cleaned houses and struggled to pay bills. She was a musician, and now finally other people could see that too. Rosa walked home that night in a daze, carrying a small collection of business cards and phone numbers in her pocket. The city streets looked the same as always, but everything felt different. She kept replaying the evening in her mind, hardly believing that it had really happened. When she opened the door to her small apartment, Elena was waiting up for her, practicing violin quietly in the corner of their living room. "Mom, you're home late," Elena said, looking up from her music. "How was the fancy dinner party?" Rosa sat down on their old couch and told Elena everything that had happened. She described the cruel setup, the moment of panic when she realized she would have to play, and then the incredible feeling of sitting at that beautiful piano again. Elena's eyes grew wider and wider as the story continued. "Mom, I can't believe they treated you like that at first, but then you showed them who you really are." "I'm not sure what happens next," Rosa admitted. "All these people gave me their contact information and talked about concerts and newspaper articles. It feels too good to be true." Elena put down her violin and hugged her mother tightly. "Mom, you're the most talented person I know. It's about time other people figured that out too." The next morning, Rosa's phone started ringing early. Catherine, the music critic, called to set up an interview for the newspaper story. Dr. Peterson called to discuss scholarship opportunities at the local music school. Mr. Harrison wanted to schedule a meeting about possible concert performances. But the biggest surprise came when Rosa checked her email. The video of her performance had indeed gone viral overnight. Hundreds of thousands of people had watched it, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive and supportive. "This woman has more talent in her little finger than most people have, in their entire bodies," one person wrote. "I'm crying watching this. She turned what was supposed to be a cruel joke into something beautiful and powerful," wrote another. "Someone please tell me this woman is getting the recognition she deserves now," demanded a third commenter. Catherine's newspaper article came out 3 days later with the headline, "The Music That Money Can't Buy, Local Housekeepers Hidden, Talent Stuns Wealthy Dinner Party." The story was picked up by national news outlets, and suddenly, Rosa was receiving calls from music schools, concert venues, and television shows around the country. The response was overwhelming, but Rosa tried to stay focused on what was really important. She still had bills to pay, and Elena's education to think about. She couldn't just quit her job and hope that musical opportunities would pay the rent. But slowly, carefully, she began to explore the possibilities that were opening up for her. Mrs. Chen from the Music Conservatory arranged for Rosa to audition for their adult degree program, and she was not only accepted, but offered a full scholarship. Dr. Peterson introduced Rosa to his former colleagues, and soon she had opportunities to give piano lessons to wealthy families who were willing to pay well for instruction from someone with her unique story and obvious talent. Mr. Harrison kept his promise and scheduled Rosa for her first public performance in over 20 years. It was a small concert at an intimate venue, but when Rosa walked onto the stage and saw the audience of 200 people waiting to hear her play, she felt like she was living in a dream. Elena sat in the front row that night, beaming with pride as her mother performed the same Chopin piece that had changed everything at the Thompson dinner party. But this time, Rosa also played some of her own musical arrangements, pieces she had created during those long, lonely nights of practice in empty office buildings. The audience gave Rosa a standing ovation that lasted for 5 full minutes. After the concert, dozens of people approached her to express their admiration and to ask about future performances. Catherine's original newspaper article led to a book deal. Publishers were interested in Rosa's story about hidden talent, perseverance, and the music that sustains people through difficult times. Rosa was amazed that anyone would want to read about her life, but Elena convinced her that her story could inspire other people who felt trapped by their circumstances. The most satisfying moment came 6 months after that life-changing dinner party. Rosa was performing at a benefit concert for music education programs when she spotted David and Linda Thompson in the audience. They had donated money to attend the event, and after the performance, they approached Rosa backstage. David looked genuinely ashamed as he spoke. "Rosa, I owe you a tremendous apology for how I treated you that night. I was cruel and thoughtless, and I'm deeply sorry." Linda nodded in agreement. "We both are. We've learned a lot about ourselves since then, and none of it was very pleasant. We want you to know that we've made substantial donations to several music education programs in your honor." Rosa appreciated their apologies, but she had moved far beyond needing their approval or validation. She had found her voice again, both literally and figuratively, and no one could take that away from her. Elena ended up getting into her dream music school with a partial scholarship, and Rosa's growing income from lessons and performances made it possible to pay for the rest. Mother and daughter would sometimes practice together in their new, larger apartment, which now had room for a real piano. Catherine became a close friend and continued writing about Rosa's performances and achievements. She often said that meeting Rosa had changed her own perspective on what makes someone worthy of attention and respect. A year after that memorable dinner party, Rosa received an invitation that made her laugh out loud. The Thompson family wanted to hire her to perform at their next dinner party, as the featured entertainment, not as the housekeeper. Rosa politely declined. She had moved on to bigger and better stages, and she had no interest in returning to that world of shallow people trying to impress each other with their wealth and status. Instead, Rosa focused on her teaching, her performing, and her studies at the music conservatory. She discovered that she loved helping other adult students who, like her, had postponed their musical dreams due to life circumstances. The most rewarding part of Rosa's new life wasn't the recognition or the money, although those things certainly made daily life easier. The most rewarding part was the music itself. After years of practicing in secret and playing only for herself, Rosa could finally share her gift with the world. She often thought about her grandmother, who had started her on this musical journey so many years ago. Her grandmother had always said that music was a gift that was meant to be shared, not hidden away. It had taken Rosa many years to understand what that really meant. Now, standing on stage night after night, watching audiences respond to the music she created, Rosa finally understood. Music had the power to connect people across all the barriers that usually divided them: wealth, education, social status, race, and background. When Rosa played piano, none of those things mattered. There was only the music and the shared human experience of being moved by beauty and truth. Elena graduated from music school and became a professional violinist. Sometimes mother and daughter performed together, creating music that was even more beautiful because of the love and mutual support that flowed between them. Rosa never forgot the lessons she learned from those difficult years of struggle. She established a foundation that provided instruments and lessons for children from low-income families, because she knew firsthand how music could transform lives when given the chance. The cruel dinner party that was supposed to humiliate Rosa had instead become the beginning of her new life. Sometimes the worst moments turn out to be gifts in disguise, opening doors we never knew existed, and revealing strengths we didn't know we had. Rosa's story became proof that talent and dignity exist everywhere, often in the most unexpected places. All they need is someone willing to look beyond the surface and recognize the extraordinary potential that lies within ordinary people.